All right, welcome everyone. I can see folks are starting to join. So we'll give everyone just a minute to get settled while we're doing introductions. Okay. Awesome. We'll let people trickle in, but want to get started on time. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Lauren. I'm the managing director of the nonprofit Stop Stalking Us. Thanks so much for joining us today for the panel discussion about stalking and online harassment of journalists and public officials. This is the second series in virtual events for the 19th Annual Stalking Awareness Month. And so with this virtual series, Stop Stalking Us is working to amplify the voices of survivors and explore how we can better respond to this pervasive and dangerous crime of stalking. We'll drop some helpful links in the chat as we go, but you can also find information and resources on our website, stopstalkingus.com. And we're very grateful to be able to host this conversation today with some really wonderful, brilliant people. I'll start by introducing our moderator, Laura Evans. Laura is the president and CEO of Laura Evans Media, and prior to that, spent 26 years as an award-winning journalist and news anchor based in Washington, D.C., covering everything from presidential inaugurations to innovative change makers. Laura, thank you for guiding us today. I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Lauren, so much. I appreciate you and all that you've done to make this possible today. And thanks to everybody for joining us. I'm here today because I have a personal interest in the safety and well-being of my fellow journalists and the public officials who we cover. So I really, again, thank you to Stop Stalking Us for holding this important conversation and coordinating all the pieces. This is a dialogue that we really need to have. Let me introduce our panelists today. I'm so pleased to connect you with these incredible women, Bria Clark, Gigi Muhammad, and I'm going to bring back Lauren Kay, who just introduced me because she's got a lot to contribute to this conversation too. So thank you for being with us. Want to give you some quick introductions before we get to the questions. And first, Bria. She was the first millennial mayor of Norman, Oklahoma. Now she serves as director of the JCPenney Leadership Center at the University of Oklahoma's Price College of Business. Bria served on the Norman City Council from 2016 to 2019 and has also served as a member of the Oklahoma Municipal League Board of Directors. As the mayor of Norman during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Bria faced repeated threats and harassment as she carried out her role, and we'll hear more about that in the next hour. Gigi Muhammad is Senior Manager of Free Expression and Digital Safety at PEN America. It's a nonprofit organization that champions the freedom to write and protects free expression in the United States and worldwide. Gigi has over 9 years of experience working on human rights issues, journalism, and safety and security in the Middle East and internationally. At PEN America, she has developed an online harassment field manual for journalists, writers, and activists to prepare for and respond to online abuse and harassment. And also joining this discussion, because it's important to have some delineations between what online harassment is and stalking, and on all of the definitions of what we're really facing right now, is Lauren Kay. She's the managing director of Stop Stalking Us, the only nonprofit in the United States specifically focused on stalking. I do want to point out that Amanda Aguilar, a journalist with ABC 30 Action News in Fresno, California, was supposed to be with us today, but in the end could not join us. She did send these comments explaining that. She said, unfortunately, Disney, which owns my station, ABC 30, does not want me to participate on this panel. While they want me to feel empowered and share my story to bring awareness to what they realize is a big problem in news, Disney Global Security has safety concerns. Disney really makes safety a high priority for its talent, which I'm grateful for, but also sad because it is important to me to raise awareness. I'm unfortunately not the only person at my station that has been dealing with a stalker. I know that story very well myself, and we can talk a little bit more about that in the coming hour too. Well, I'm sorry that Amanda couldn't join us. We are very grateful to all of you for being with us and helping raise awareness around this important issue. You know, January is National Stalking Awareness Month, and it's essential that we have this conversation around the growing problem of threatening behavior faced by public figures like journalists, politicians, and senior public servants. And we're really talking about a spectrum of behavior here, from bullying and harassment to death threats, stalking, even cyber and gang stalking. And a lot of this behavior may start or be most visible online, but of course we know that it can also carry into real life as well. So I want to start here by providing everyone with a little bit of context about each of your work and how you've been personally impacted by the issue of stalking and harassment. Bria, can we start with you and maybe give us a brief overview? Walk us through your experience, what happened to you as mayor of Norman in 2020. We'll get into, some of my specific questions, but just kind of give us a high-level overview.
Sure. So thank you for the opportunity first to be a part of this very important conversation. I think we cannot be silent about it because it's not going to go away. We need changes in terms of laws and policies to protect us. But until we get that, I think the more we talk about it, the better. So for a little background, Norman is in the great state of Oklahoma, which is a very conservative state. Norman is the home of the University of Oklahoma, so most college towns tend to be a little bit more progressive. When the pandemic began, I was the very first mayor, and even before the state, to declare a state of emergency. So I was immediately seen as that. I've actually been called Oklahoma's AOC. So there's that. And so I immediately had a target on my back as anti-business, anti-freedom. And I was also young and female. So there are only about 20% of mayors in the state, but also pretty much nationally, are female. And I'm the youngest female mayor to ever serve in the city of Norman. So I immediately had a target on my back for doing what I thought was right. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the harassment began on social media and via email, but I saw a crossover into like seeing pictures of my home online, and this is where you find her. And I've received letters at my home that actually reference my child and social media posts I had made. So it's this really interweaving of all of them. So it was very much, I think, leading the way and doing what I thought was right to protect my residents that resulted in me feeling unprotected. And with the reports to the police department, nothing came of it because I don't think there's policies in place or precedent in place to show these are real and they need to be taken seriously. And as we've seen, so often it gets ignored until there is a death or something like that happens. So it was very frustrating to have the threats continue and feel like I had no support from the law enforcement side. And if my city police wasn't going to protect me, the state police certainly wasn't, because again, of I think the political ideology differences, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, very interesting. And I know there's a lot of legs to your story too. And we'll talk a little bit more about the web that it was woven through this whole journey for you. I want to talk to you, Gigi, about how you came into this work that you're doing with PEN America. And then maybe you can give us an overview of kind of the abuse that you're seeing through your work that often are faced by online, by journalists and activists and public politicians, public servants. But at first, how did you get into this work?
Sure, thank you so much. And I'm very grateful to be part of this important conversation. So I actually come from a journalism background. I worked as a journalist for a long time covering human rights abuses and social issues in Egypt and in the Middle East. And journalists covering human rights abuses, specifically women, are not really supported and loved doing that and covering issues that the government do not like. My experience with that started from being a journalist and a woman journalist. And then after that, I shifted into working in safety and security, specifically with journalists and writers who work in hostile environments and covering dangerous issues. And then I joined PEN America a year ago. And my wonderful team have developed this. I can send a link here, or I think you might be sending it, Lauren, after. They developed a resource for people who are trying to navigate online abuse.
Mhm.
And it's a field manual. And in this field manual, you can find different sections from preparation, responding, self-care, like and legal support and other resources that you might need. And the reason PEN America developed that is that PEN America, as you mentioned earlier, is that it's a nonprofit. It works with human rights activists, writers, and journalists to protect freedom of expression. What happened is that the more we worked with people, the more we received concerns about how online abuse and online harassment is making it very hard for them to do their jobs. And they feel threatened, and it actually affects their freedom of expression, and it affects their safety, sense of safety in general. And you mentioned earlier, like how things don't really stay on your computer. They don't. Like there was a survey done by ICFJ and UNESCO about women journalists around the world. And it said that 20% of respondents to that survey said that their offline attacks and physical attacks that happened to them were actually linked to things that started as online abuse and online harassment. So the issue is really big and it's very dangerous. And it doesn't only affect our sense of safety, but it also affects, like, people tend to self-censor because it makes sense. If someone's family is threatened, of course they would feel the need to protect themselves and their family. So the issue is really big, and I don't want to keep continuing about that because like we have an hour to do it. But yeah, this is how I got into the safety and security.
And Gigi, had you had your own experience, or did you witness others in your job, in your work, having their experiences with online harassment?
Both. I had a lot of experience myself with online abuse and online harassment, and that was for several reasons. Part of it was because of the topics I'm covering that people didn't like, but also because we all know that online abuse, not everyone is targeted for the same reasons. Part of it was my identity. I'm a woman of color in this field. It's not like people get targeted more because of their intersectional identities. And this is something important to keep in mind as well.
Yeah. And it was obviously for both of you, Gigi and Bria, it's an effort to silence you and to change course. My experience as a TV anchor and reporter was a little bit different in that it was a story that somebody wanted me to cover that I ended up not covering. I'll just offer brief context about my story. This person had reached out to me, sent me a pitch that piqued my interest initially. He was accusing a doctor basically of botching a medical procedure. I dug around a bit. I spoke with that person who sent me the pitch. I spoke with his lawyer. It just wasn't up to snuff, and my gut told me that there was not a story here. So I determined I was not going to be covering this. There was something fishy about it. And so I dropped it, it went away. And then the guy came back months later, called my TV station, said he was going to kill me, and then called the Washington Post, said he was going to shoot me, and then called other TV stations and said the same thing. This was in 2015, before we were mandated to be on social media in the, concerted way that many journalists are now. So it was mostly the phone calls and the threats. And I ended up having, 24/7 security, but the station acted very quickly. Later there was, and then they ended up arresting the guy, and it went away. But it wasn't until later that once we were on social media, there was all kinds of online harassment and just different viewers coming in. But even after that situation, you would have thought that there was some kind of new policy or education, or how do you keep yourself safe? And, and I'd love to get to that in just a little bit. And Gigi, that the field manual that you were just talking about is in the chat. So anybody who's watching, please go to the chat and you can get that PEN America field guide. It's really, really fabulous and really offers some great, guidance on this. Gigi, what are some of the most common types of threatening behaviors that you're seeing toward journalists?
We see a lot of different tactics against journalists and writers. Some of them, they are hate speech, which is like, I know like it's self-explanatory. It's not something that people are targeted for their identities. And this is one of the things that happen. Another things, we see a lot of physical threats. And in the cases of women and non-binary individuals, mainly sexual violence. And then we see cyber mobs. And with cyber mobs, it's when a group of people pile on one individual with harassment and in multiple ways. Then we have also something called dog whistling. And it's a sneaky way of alerting others to harm an individual online. And they use codes or symbols and stuff like that. And only this group knows what does that mean. And this means that like this person is now a target. One of the other things which unfortunately, Brea, you said that happened to you, and I'm very sorry to hear that, is doxing. Someone publishing home address or personal phone number or personal email of someone and asking others to harm them. These are very, very common and happen a lot. One other thing also I just want to say is that there is also, when it comes to the volume of the harassment or the content that the person is receiving, we talked about the things like, for example, doxing. One thing can happen and it's really terrifying. But another thing that also counts as online abuse is that if someone is sending me hundreds and hundreds of useless emails and texts just to overburden me, and prevent me from using my device and my accounts, this is also abuse. And this is something very good to keep in mind, because like online abuse wasn't a conversation that was taken seriously till recently. And the problem with that is that people feel isolated and they feel that they are alone in this, and they feel that like something is wrong, but I cannot name it. And that's why this discussion that we're having is very important, because people can now say that, oh, first, I'm not alone, but also this is wrong. I know I felt it's wrong, but I can name it now.
So Lauren, talk about the difference between online harassment and stalking. And I know there's a little bit of an overlap, right?
Yeah, there's definitely an overlap, and I think the challenge in parsing those things out is part of the abuse in itself. So if you're getting, dozens or hundreds of messages, having to wade through all of those, and oftentimes I think those can be, I think what's so hard, and I don't want to speak for your experiences, but is the not knowing how real are these threats, and the like hypervigilance that comes with that, questioning yourself if you're overreacting, if you're like, well, I got this tweet, so crossing a line there. So for us, we sort of think of, harassment as comments that are rude, crass, bigoted, and can be deeply upsetting and have their own impact, but doesn't necessarily cause fear. And with stalking, I think there really is that fear of of physical interaction, altercation, attack. And again, not, having to just kind of always be on alert, because it's really hard to know when those might switch over. So for us, that's how we see them connected.
Okay. And Brea, everything Lauren just named is what you went through as, public figure. You got the wide range of messages, from the crass to the rude to the bigoted to the truly threatening. How have those different kinds of messages affected you? And what did you learn about distinguishing between those two? How did you separate a credible threat from other kinds of abuse?
Well, I think, you touched on that. We're like, is this what I think it is? We don't listen to our instinct because society hasn't told us it really is a threat. Again, until I'm dead. And then apparently, oh, yep, that was a threat. And so I'm glad that it's evolving where they're starting to take it more seriously. But from the crass, I got an email, I think it was a Facebook message once that was like, I bet you got this office just like our vice president did, on your knees. And I would screenshot those and share them with the world and make money off of it. And, tell people donate to my campaign so we can fight back. So
good for you.
I've got pretty thick skin in that aspect. But when it started really crossing a line was, again, seeing my home on pictures of my home online. There was a stalking and a letter that was sent to my house and to other elected officials in Norman, and the return address was our local newspaper. And they immediately made a statement that it did not come from them. But I had been referencing Julius Jones. You may have heard that. He was on death row for a long time in our state, and his sentence ended up getting commuted. But the night before, I just made a statement. I can only imagine what his mother is feeling right now. And then that tweet was screenshotted and my face was put next to it in the letter. And then it went on to describe how she's talking about this mother's son. Well, what if we went into her home and woke up her son? And that was beyond the line for me. You know, come at me all day long. People have, you know, verbally attacked me in public when I'm by myself, followed me out while I'm waiting for an Uber to get away from the situation. That was terrifying. But I mean, the face-to-face one really gets you, but even if it's not face-to-face and it mentions your children, because then you feel truly helpless. They didn't ask for me to run for office. They've been, you know, sacrificed so much for me to serve my community, and to have them brought into it in that way was truly terrifying. And again, no reports are made, just so I can say I reported it in case something happens, but I'm so tired of I reported it in case something happens. I would like to be able to say I reported it and it was taken seriously and it was handled. And it's not, and that's incredibly frustrating and scary for when your loved ones are targeted in that very specific way.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, A-list celebrities have all kinds of resources so that they can have the massive security detail that, you know, is warranted in these kinds of situations. What kind of security or resources were available to you as mayor when you were trying to protect yourself? And how did this affect your ability to serve the people of Norman?
It very much made me nervous and not trusting. When people would, you know, see me in public or say Mayor Clark, I wouldn't. Pre-COVID, I would have walked up immediately and said, hello, what's your favorite thing about Norman? And then now post-COVID, post threats, I pause and I don't go talk to someone unless I have someone with me. Right after the threats. So my big threat that made headlines was a cop from a neighboring community posted that mayor should be strung up on the court lawn, and, you know, let's show them what we do with public officials we don't agree with. And I mean, he was talking about lynching me from a police officer. And so my police department, I think because they had to, I had asked for some sort of detail, at least for a few days, but I never felt supported by them, to be brutally honest, because it came from a police officer. So I felt like if they were going to pick sides, it wasn't going to be mine, and they were offended, I even reported it. Wow. So yeah, it just,
and coming from a police officer. So what kind of security did you have?
I did see a police vehicle. The house that I lived in at the time was right next to our neighborhood pool, and it had a parking lot there. And so I would see a police vehicle there from time to time. But there were a fair amount of police officers that lived in that community, and it was a very hostile environment. We had issues with defunding, and it's worth pointing out that misinformation is often what causes these threats. I mean, my decisions I made during COVID were very real, but the defunding that allegedly happened, no one was ever defunded, but you say a lie enough and it becomes a reality. And so even if I had a police detail there, I know they didn't like me. And so it was very uncomfortable. I'd had, you know, cops' wives verbally attack me at the community pool in front of my children. And my yard signs were taken from my yard. So it just, I didn't even feel safe in my city, let alone even with police detail. I was scared to get pulled over at one point. I still am, frankly, in the city of Norman. So it's, you know, what's supposed to be there to protect us. I had that double whammy of, they were already mad at me, so I couldn't depend on them when I needed them most, and they wouldn't take any of my reports seriously. It was very terrifying.
Very terrifying. And let me ask just one more question too about that, because you mentioned the police officer. How was that, you know, the attacks or the threats from the officer? How was that experience different from the threats that the abuse you received from others? That kind of upped the ante, didn't it?
It very much did. Again, in our culture, the police are supposed to be who you turn to when you are threatened, and my threat came from a police officer. So, and again, I feel like our cops are going to side with our cops and defer to them instead of deferring to me, as again, that troublemaker down in Norman, Oklahoma. And I had asked to meet with him, to talk to him and say, you need to understand the weight of what you did. And we had the meeting set up at the Norman Police Department, and he canceled it at the last minute. So I never even had the chance to speak my truth to the person that completely uprooted my world. And, you know, my kids saw that. I have a 15-year-old, and having to explain to him, oh, well, he didn't mean it. Like, what else are you gonna tell them? I can't say,
Right.
oh, well, the cops aren't taking this seriously, honey. Let's hope nothing happens. So
Yeah.
it was very, the fact that came from a cop was very, very, again, terrifying. I don't know how else to describe the situation.
Yeah, you feel extremely vulnerable, I'm sure. Gigi, what are the commonly reported impacts on the careers and lives of the victims as you've seen it?
A lot. I just want to add one thing before I answer the question, because
Sure.
Priya said something very important about misinformation. And some of the tactics we actually see with that, for example, is the distribution of non-consensual intimate imagery and the creation of fake profiles. And this is deliberate. And this is very, very deliberate. And we see it done to journalists all over the world. Is that like, and it's just, this is what they want to do. And thank you, Bria, for mentioning that. This is a very important point to keep in mind as well. With the impacts that it has on journalists and anyone who is struggling with online abuse, we see from psychological effects, we see how hypervigilance, we see how people are really always terrified. One of the things I used to do physical safety trainings, and one of the things that was always worrying is that your actual understanding and reading of threat changes because you keep asking yourself, is this really real?
Yeah.
Is it going to happen or not? And it becomes really dangerous if you're a journalist covering dangerous environments, because you really need your radar to be working well in that situation.
Mhm.
This is one of the things. The other thing is that definitely self-censorship is a big thing. And people quitting social media and leaving their profiles and deleting their profiles is a thing that is happening. And how can we blame them? You know what I mean? Like, it's everyone's right to speak and express themselves and do the work that they need to do and they want to do. But at the same time, people choose their safety. And this is a very dangerous thing we have, specifically for the press and for freedom of expression. People, if you decide to quit social media just because you feel unsafe, that's not okay.
Right, right. Yeah.
If I can add one more thing, you mentioned these fake profiles. So I told you the story about I got, you got your job by like our vice president on her knees. There is actually a Twitter page out there called Bria's Knees, and the picture is a zoomed in photo of my actual knees. That is so creepy. Like I don't even know what, I just don't engage it. But please, if you go look it up, don't follow him, please. But it's stuff like that. I mean, and you're right. It like snowballs where you try and stand up for yourself, and they take a new level to try and shut you down. And that really creeped me out.
Well, Bria, let me dig in on that, because I'm curious what the impact has been on you. You say you have thick skin. I can tell you do, and you're a powerful woman. How, and I mean, how do you find that balance between going back at them and engaging, and then where you're like, I can't say anything, and then you start to become silent? Number one, how did it impact you? And number two, how did you change, or did your approach to all of this?
Well, they always tell you, don't read the comments. I really quit reading the comments because I'd stand up anyways because I refuse to be silenced. I know I lead by example, being a female progressive in the state of Oklahoma. And if they can shut me down, they can shut anyone down.
Right.
So, having the thick skin, practicing self-care, I'm much more involved on my personal social media than I was while I was in office, because it got so toxic. I would go do my part. I mean, they would comment random things on, I'd talk about an upcoming festival and the comments would be horrible. And so once they discovered that they would be fighting in the comments and I would never engage, but that was a big deal. And honestly, how it impacted me, I didn't realize how much it was until I got the gift of being out of office. And I say gift because I only ran again because people were like, you can't leave, we need you right now. And so went for it. And then the entire state of Oklahoma came for me, and I ended up losing my race. And it's so funny, in my concession speech, my mother watched it the next day and she called me and she goes, you lost, right? Because there's such a sense of relief. And I was all like, good luck, everyone. I've done my part. There's a
Oh,
beautiful picture of me and my oldest son, and we're all smiles, and you would think it was before the results came out. So, and now that I've had time to be away from it, it's serious PTSD.
yeah.
I have a hard time engaging in my community because I'm scared at this point. And I didn't realize how much I had turned off emotion to function in that role because I needed to. And it just shows we'll put up with anything to do our jobs.
Right.
But once I didn't have to do it and I was able to really look at it, I mean, I have to like take a deep breath to check my email sometimes because it took so much from me in terms of safety and mental health and time for my children. When people ask, was it worth it? I mean, I say yes, because it was. I did a lot of good. I know I saved lives. I can look at the data and prove that. But was it worth it personally? No, it was not.
That's tough. Yeah. And as mom, you're thinking about your kids. Yeah. I mean, I remember in my situation, the 24/7 security, they would be following us, and my kids were very young. I have three, and they were very young at the time, and wondering why they noticed people following. And I didn't want to say we have security on us, but they would, come and kind of watch at the soccer games, and then they would circle our house before we could come into the house. And, as mother bear, you're not just concerned about you, but it's become your whole family. And it does take a mental health toll for sure.
On to
Go
this
ahead.
point, I hope I have the chance to recover, and I think I will. I turned 40 in April, so I've got plenty of time to re-engage. But my son's father, it took a toll on my marriage. I'm now divorced, and he has made comments that, well, I wish I can put in our decree that you can't ever run for office again because I'm worried about the safety of our son. And that was a moment where it makes you realize it impacts so much more than you and so many different aspects of your life, even after you're out of the public eye.
Yeah. Well, maybe you had this experience too, because you're such an incredible speaker and you can help inform and raise awareness about this issue. And, we need those strong voices. So thank you for continuing to make this an issue that you will talk about. Lauren, I want to pivot for a second and talk about Stop Stalking Us, which, I know you have had a leadership position there for some time. Talk about the current efforts on this issue and what your primary mission is.
Yeah. So so a little bit of context for those who don't know. So I co-founded Stop Stalking Us with Lily Baldwin, who's a filmmaker, an artist, a dancer, and she has been stalked for over 13 years and counting by a man she's never met. And to me, what's really interesting is that she was on tour in Europe dancing with David Byrne, and that's where he saw her. And there's this really interesting thing to me of people who are just at work doing their jobs, and you may not think about that with a dancer or even a mayor, but it's like that you're at work doing your job. and I am very lucky that I have not been personally targeted, but somebody who I'm very, very close to was. And so I saw firsthand every day what was going on. And I think it's something where you think if it's happening, you assume that there is somebody you can call that will come help. And until you're in it and you realize there's there are just very few options. And it's a really challenging system. And I really recommend for everyone, we'll make sure to circulate this again, but we did a panel with Dr. Patrick Brady, who's a stalking expert and researcher. And so many of the things we've talked on today, he talks about too, in terms of the data and research and what that bears out. And I think it's so important to go back and look at that as well. For us, we as to why it is so complicated, and for us, one of the biggest challenges of stalking is that it is a state. It's varies by state. So the statutes vary by state, and and there's a lot of stuff where it's, okay, you're in, Texas, but the other person is in Florida, and everybody's kind of like, well, this isn't our problem. We also have systems that are very antiquated, and folks that it's like, well, this happened online, like it doesn't feel real to the outside person when it obviously feels and is very real. And so for us, we really want to put a spotlight on stalking, which intersects with so many other issues, including domestic violence and cyber stalking and, journalism, to have a place for people to go. And first of all, to share their stories. We're really fortunate to have people who have been public and who are able to share their stories publicly. Most people don't have sort of the security to be able to do that in a way that's comfortable. So we really want to work on telling people's stories so that others can understand the depth of what this caused and how disruptive it is to every aspect of people's lives. And we also want folks to know that they're not alone. I think, stalking by nature really tends to isolate people. And by, joining, I mean, there's, the statistics say over 13 million Americans stalked in any given year. We know that's a vast undercounting, because it's not something that's often reported. But for something that's affecting tens of millions of our neighbors, our family members, ourselves, we really want to just be able to bring collective voices together. And one of the things we've seen that's been most impactful, and some of our partners, Dr. Brady's doing this, Spark is another organization, are trainings for law enforcement and prosecutors to understand. Because what makes stalking and sometimes harassment unique is that it's often criminalized. It criminalizes legal behavior. And so it can often too depend on like who it is you are reporting this to, and what their gender is, and what their politics and preconceived notions might be. And so it can really vary, and it's hard to prepare victims for what to expect because of that. So so for us, telling people's stories and really working to make meaningful change, so that the laws that do exist can be implemented, and that folks understand the implications. And I'll just close and say, because I could quote everything he says, but what Dr. Brady also says is that stalking is homicide in slow motion. And to me, that's so powerful, because it sets up the stakes, but it's also like when something's happening in slow motion, you have many different points where you can intersect and change the outcome of that. So how can we work to intercept before it becomes, a tragic story when everyone looks back and is like, oh yeah, we knew. So yeah.
No, that's a really good point. And so Gigi, I turn to you. How can we intercept? Can you talk a little bit about Penn's online harassment field manual, which we brought up earlier, which is in the chat, and then offer some high-level best practices that maybe you would recommend to public figures to protect themselves?
Of course. So a lot of the things that we talk about is preparation. We talk about responding, but also preparation is something very important. And then this means that, for example, do we have good digital hygiene, which means what type of information about us is available online? With doxing, so the US is one of the very, very few countries in the world that allows private information and data brokers, the concept of data brokers that sell information, package it and sell it for cents. It's a very terrifying concept. I moved here a couple of years ago, and for me, I'm not used to that. I don't think I will. The fact that I, as an individual, can just go to these platforms and request information about someone and get wherever they lived, wherever they live now, and the model of their cars, and where their family members are. It's a scary thing to have online for everyone. So what we talk about is, for example, if you're worried, one of the things that you can do is to get your information removed from data brokers. This can be done manually. and you send requests, and it takes a lot of time, but it's definitely worth it. Or it can be through hiring like services, like for example, Delete Me or Canary. You pay for them annually, and then they will do it on your behalf. Another thing that people can do is that just this state of mind of being intentional of the information we provide online. If I'm using my Instagram for just private and with my family and stuff like that, or personal use, mine is private. I don't have it public. I don't have it open for everyone. And this is where I can share the things I want to share that I'm not worried about. But if I'm using my Twitter account, for example, for work and professional purposes, I am very careful about the things I post there. If I want, like, for example, some people like to post pictures of their dogs, cute, very nice, and the name of their dogs. But for example, what a doxer or an abuser thinks is that, did you use your dog's name as a password or as an answer for a security question? So I keep thinking about it all the time like a puzzle. Is it like what type of information anyone can find on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on my Instagram that they can put together and create the story and timeline of my life that might provide information actually that I don't want people to know. Right. This is one of the things. And I know none of this is meant that the burden is on the individual. There are so many things also that we work on because, for example, if you're working with a newsroom as a journalist, we work with newsrooms to set up best practices and policies to support their staff if they're facing online abuse. So because this is everyone's responsibility. It's not, the burden cannot be only on the individual that is facing. It has to be something collective. We advocate and we try to work with platforms as well to have better mechanisms and tools and features for people to manage content and just to protect themselves when they're in the middle of an attack. So this is some of the things that we work on and we advise people to do. I can go on. There's a lot of other things, but like I don't want to take more time.
Well, no, it's fascinating. Please do. I'm curious though. Do you find that newsroom managers, that heads of newsrooms, are starting to wake up to this? That the burden is also on them. That they need to educate and help train their staff on no, don't answer to this kind of engagement. I mean, because a lot of us as journalists are mandated to be out there and to engage with our viewers, so or our readers. And so where do you draw that line, and what do you look for when you're maybe not trusting yourself? When does it cross the line? I've asked a lot of questions in that one question.
It's actually very important because like when I was working as a journalist earlier in my career, the conversation of online abuse and digital safety was not a thing. I definitely did not study it in school, in J school, and definitely was not in the first newsrooms I worked with. And whenever the conversation was brought up, it's more of like, did you die? Like it was ridiculous because like it was not taken as something that is as a serious threat.
Sure.
And then now it's changing. I can see the change. It's very, very slow. I would like it to be better than this, but it is definitely changing. The conversation is more common now. And it could be for good reasons that actually newsrooms care now, that like to support their staff and everything. But part of it also is that there is no other option. Is that specifically if you want your journalist to be online, if you're requesting your journalist to be online for viewership or anything like that. So, and also newsrooms are witnessing and seeing how this translates into physical threats as well. And how it's causing burnout in the industry, how it's causing a high turnover. People are quitting. Very great talents are quitting. It's undermining diversity and inclusion efforts that are being done because people are like, they're targeted for their identities. So there are so many problems that are happening that are associated to online abuse, and you cannot just like, separate them. I don't know if I answered both of the questions, but
no, you did. No, that was great. And Bria, I want to turn to you too, because I'm curious what your thoughts are about what we can do to make having a public presence safer for women public officials.
That's
Any
my
thoughts?
biggest concern is, when I lost, you'd think I'd be sad. And it was the greatest sigh of relief I'd sighed in a long time. And
Yeah.
so I worry about the chilling effect. We've had more women in Congress, we're still only 24% of mayors, but people aren't even running, or they're not running again. I was very blessed to be in a women mayors network that had mayors of cities all sizes all over the United States. And it didn't matter where. Didn't matter how big their city was, but people, especially during COVID, had their houses spray painted, picketing in front of their house. I mean, look what happened to Governor Whitmer. Like, why would you want to run for office when that happens? I mean, I'm amazed she ran for office again. I mean, that's the ultimate, you're not going to scare me off. But again, I have to wonder, is it worth it at this point? Like most of the local government, we don't have the resources as higher level of government. Even one of our benefits, I think, is we are closest to the people, which also is terrifying in situations like this. And so we don't make a lot of money. I made a whopping $100 a month to be the mayor of the third largest city in the state of Oklahoma. So you don't do it for that. You do it because you care. But then when you see these stories, my story, I had a mayor friend a man with some serious mental health issues. The cops, had been stalking her, finally went and raided his home for some other reason and found bullets with her name written on them.
Oh
Like,
my.
why would anyone want to do this? Especially if you have other, family members, be it a significant other, parents you care for, and not just children. You're jeopardizing all of them. So my biggest concern is, even though we're the greatest nation in the world, we are woefully underrepresented when it comes to minorities and women. And they're the ones that get targeted the most. And it's obviously very strategic. And I'm afraid it will work. I'm afraid that we'll be silenced and people will realize that my safety has to come first. And then we'll lose the small voice that we've managed to acquire, which will set us further back. So,
Yeah.
Which is
What
something
advice-
I wanted to, oh, sorry, I just wanted to jump in quickly because there's to connect a point that Bria and Gigi made that I think is really important in the sort of like political system at large, is also that I know for Lily and a lot of stalking victims, Lily's only just registered to vote again, because by being registered to vote, her address is public, which is also wild that that has to happen. And it's something that I think some states are working on, especially around domestic violence, but that like to think that, people are being shut out sort of at all of these different points in the process. And when so often people are like, well, just register to vote, like you're out there getting people to register. And it's like the other side of that coin, right, is these safety concerns that just touch all these different places in our lives.
we have a voter portal in Oklahoma where all you have to know to find out all of their voting information, polling place, and if you know the regular voters, is their name and their birth date. That's it. It's terrifying.
Yeah. So what advice, Bria, would you have for others in your position, knowing what you know now, having gone through what you've been through? What advice do you have?
Take it seriously. I mean, it's like the moment you don't is when someone's going to get hurt. I have cameras at my home. I have a good support network I don't know, we talk about it's good to know that you're not alone, but then it almost makes it even scarier because it's that widespread. But being with people who take you seriously and who know what you're going through is I think important for the self-care aspect. But continuing to file the reports, continuing to talk about it, because if the law enforcement isn't going to take you seriously, somebody will. But making sure that you're communicating your feelings and the threats, so people understand that what's happening. Because if you're quiet and it comes out of nowhere, they're, well, we never knew. So I think continuing to surround yourself with people who understand, who listen, taking safety seriously in terms of knowing who your police officers are and getting cameras and carrying mace, whatever you need to do. But and again, just reporting it constantly. And we touched on it's different state by state until we get and you touched on the tricky part too. Well, it could be someone in Florida, like you said, harassing someone in Texas. It needs to be a federal law because of the nature of how our country is. Until it is a federal law, we're just kind of making it up as we go, and it's past time to address that from the federal level, so it can be a no questions asked addressed uniformly around our state, because it shouldn't be safer in one state than it is in another. That's not how this country should operate.
Great point, Bria. And Lauren, I'm curious, in your attempts to affect policy, how is this issue being received by federal lawmakers? Have you even approached federal lawmakers on this, as opposed to
Yeah.
lawmakers?
Yeah, we as a young organization haven't yet. And I think for us, collecting these stories and getting this support is so important to getting people to understand that. Anybody who's either been affected personally or somebody in their life has knows it and doesn't need to explain it or have it explained to them. But for those who probably do have someone in their life and they may not know it. And so, it's an unfortunate thing, I think, in our country that, sometimes it takes people being personally affected by something to get them to engage and wanting to change. But in the meantime, Lily and I are really committed to telling these stories, and also, that it shouldn't need to or have to, end in physical violence for this to be seen as violence. Psychologically, the toll it takes on bodies, on people's lives and careers, it is just violence, period.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that we want to continue doing, and are just kind of like building the support to go and show them how widespread and pervasive and damaging this is.
Yeah. And Gigi, as we talk about impacting policy, I'm curious on the other end, how you would like to see changes made on the social media platforms within tech companies. And from that perspective, is there an effort that you're making right now?
We're doing a lot of advocacy on, we want social media platforms to have better escalation channels, which means that when people are reporting something to be removed, there is a better response and a quicker response for that. This is one of the things. We also want it easier. Like now, if you go to Facebook settings or any actually of the platform settings to change the privacy settings, it will take you time to find that. Mm-hmm. They're not really easily accessible, and it's multiple steps, and you have to do this and this and this. If someone is in the middle of an online attack, we're not thinking clearly. We're very stressed out. We're terrified of what we're seeing and affected. So this is one of the things that we would like platforms to do as well. Better escalation channel, better responses, and also like a way for people, like for it to be taken seriously and be connected with a human being as a response.
I mean, 100%, if I may, besides the Bria's Knees Twitter page, there's, fake Bria Clark pages. And every time I tried to report it, it was completely dismissed. Like I don't know if it didn't occur to whoever I was emailing, because I never got anyone on the phone, that I get free speech, love free speech, God bless America, but that is a wild form of harassment to see your likeness and people. That does not get taken seriously enough, these fake pages. And again, it was a picture of like my body parts, and they still wouldn't take it down. It was.
Lauren, what's your reaction to that whole thing? I mean, what do you do when people come to you with their stories, and like, with Bria, how do you advise people?
Yeah, there's a few sort of things that we will tell sort of everybody off the bat. And one of them is to keep a log of every incident, which is not which is a hard thing to ask people to do. But also it can be easier when you're reporting, you're reporting this to come, and essentially it shouldn't be this way. And it is that people sort of have to be their own advocates and investigators in that way. But keeping just a very basic log of what happened when, if you had a witness, and how it made you feel. And that's something we recommend. Also, this is a place where there's definitely nuance, but when it comes to stalking, and we talked a little bit about wanting to stand up and fight back to people who are saying terrible things. When it comes to stalking, the sort of like advice from everyone is not to engage, because what the stalker is learning in that period of time is what it takes for you to engage. And so if you don't respond and don't respond and don't respond, and then they come after your children and you respond, it's like, okay, now I know how to get to them. And so that can be really hard, you know, and it's something else too that I think people have to make a choice for themselves of what feels right. Oftentimes people will say, you know, yeah, just get off social media, just put your page on private, just take your, you know, your information down, just block them. And you know, sometimes we'll talk to Lenore Claire next week, who's somebody who's says never block them because her, you know, stalker told her where and when he was gonna kidnap her at LA Comic-Con, and she was able to like use that information. And so you know, so I do think having a support system around you, and also for those who are in that support system to know that they need support as well, that vicarious trauma is very real. And you know, and something else I think is another to once again be the president of the Dr. Brady fan club. But what he said last week was there's something so simple. When we say trust our gut, there's something to me where it's almost like it could be taken as like motivational poster talk. And he was just like, trusting your gut is your brain sending signals in your amygdala, telling your body something's wrong. It's a survival tactic. And, you know, it's something, especially women are socialized out of listening to. And I think when you feel something is wrong, and you need to trust that. And we have a lot of other resources on our website, which we can also drop in the chat. And it's usually a combination of things. There's not sort of one, you know, one thing, but different ways to protect yourself, and, you know, and also be able to hopefully help you advocate for yourself, which is unfortunately something we really need to be vigilant about. But there's a lot of great resources from folks like Penn and a lot of others out there that are really helpful in navigating this.
Yeah.
I just want to very quickly repeat what both Bria and Lauren said. Please trust your gut. It's saying something. It's saying something. And this is one of the things I always tell people, please trust your gut and supportive community. These are two very, very important things to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Trust your gut. Something is wrong. Something is wrong.
Yeah. Trust your gut. That's good. Well, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for this fantastic conversation today. Let's continue the conversation. I appreciate the participants for joining us today. Gigi, Bria, Lauren, thank you for facilitating this too. And you know, we're continuing the conversation that we need to have to make change, to provide greater support for our leaders and our journalists in the public sphere. You can find me on Laura Evans Media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And for those at home who want to stay engaged, or if you're a victim and needing support or resources, there is information in the chat. You can also follow or reach out to Stop Stalking Us online. They will drop their website and social information in the chat once again too, but there are all sorts of resources from PEN America, and then the resources that Lauren was just mentioning again too. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe, follow your gut.
Laura, I'm gonna add one other thing.
Yes.
So next week we'll have a conversation with Lily Baldwin and Lenore Claire, and the week after that, January 26th, we'll be talking to a therapist who specializes in healing from trauma. And different modalities of therapy that can be helpful for that are different from talk therapy, that don't necessarily require you to talk about everything that happened, and that also can be tactics that are used while you're still in the middle of it, and not sort of needing to wait for the trauma to pass to start addressing sort of like the physical and psychological concerns. So anybody that's registered for that, we hope you can attend, and we'll send out a recording of that afterwards, just as kind of like a primer. But it came up so much today, the impact on mental health, and so that's something that we're looking forward to talking about as well. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Laura, thank you so much for this, and we'll see everyone soon.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.